The Northeast, like many regions across the United States, has experienced great turbulence and transformation to its industrial base. Resurfacing today as a region of energy and manufacturing innovation, the Northeast offers many potential lessons. Panelists will examine the trends underpinning this renaissance. Please welcome to the stage Chad Evans, Executive Vice President at the Council on Competitiveness, Dolores Kruchten, Vice President of Eastman Business Park at Eastman Kodak, Leonard Poveromo, Executive Director of the Composite Prototyping Center at the Long Island Forum for Technology, Peter Rothstein, President at the Northeast Clean Energy Council, and Frank Van Mierlo, Chief Executive Officer at 1366 Technologies.
Thank you all for joining us. I think what we're going to dive into very quickly and very deeply, having heard the global perspective this morning and the recent fireside chat with Jill and Craig and Deborah, we know that the global manufacturing innovation ecosystem matters. But I think what we'd like to talk about with this great group of leaders is, why do regions matter? How are regions revving economic growth? What are the possibility frontiers? What are the opportunity space? And I think also talk about some of the challenges that the region faces and how we're overcoming those. And so with us, we have a great leader. We have Dolores Kruchten. Dolores, who's really a creator of new shared innovation infrastructure. Leonard Poveromo, we're going to share with us some of your thoughts around cutting-edge technologies that are pushing this region to the forefront of the national and global debate. Peter is going to share with us from his perspective of leading a council of both small and large clean energy technology products across the region. So looking forward to your thoughts, Peter. And of course, Frank, we've already heard a little bit about 1366, but from the perspective of an entrepreneur who's growing and thriving in this region, what are you finding to be your success markers? And so I'm just going to really open it up with the first question to the panel. And Dolores, I may turn to you first, since you're to my left, to kick off. I'd like for you all to share from your perspectives and point of view with the audience, what's distinctive about the Northeast? You know, we've heard this morning about the turbulence and the transformation and the tsunamis that have hit the region with job losses, but we're also seeing a renaissance, a resurgence. And so I'd like for each of you to talk from your perspectives a little bit about that. And Dolores, perhaps over to you.
Sure. Well, what we're doing is leveraging infrastructure and capability that was leveraged for, in my case at Kodak. We have a plant called Eastman Business Park that's a very large 1,200-acre facility that we're taking the capabilities that are inside of it, and in this case, for energy, the roll-to-roll capability, and really doing a tolling model. So we are all about bringing manufacturing jobs back in this case to New York State. And what we've done is created really great partnerships along with our infrastructure. So we have Oak Ridge National Labs that we're partnering with, and what they do is they have people that start in the labs that then can now move into Eastman Business Park and leverage the infrastructure that we have and really cross that chasm of development and innovation into manufacturing. So we have roll-to-roll capability. We have a partnership with New York Best so that they can do testing. We have a partnership with RIT where they're doing more piloting capability. So it's really looking at the capabilities across the region, tying those together in different partnerships that will enable small startup companies to really rapidly go through from innovation into manufacturing.
Well, I think those themes of the quickening of the pace of the scale up is critical. And I wonder, gentlemen, anyone want to hop in and add to what Dolores has said?
Well, for us, there's really three big reasons that we decided to do our second factory in upstate New York. And one is absolutely the human resources. I mean, if you look at that region, it actually has 300,000 students. That's pretty amazing. And many of them very suitable for high-tech manufacturing. And so we've already engaged with universities both in Rochester and Buffalo. And so that's very helpful for us. Secondly, one of the hallmarks of the new manufacturing process that we have invented to make silicon wafers is that we are much more energy efficient. So we use only a third of the energy compared to the legacy process. And we're very happy that at this new site in upstate New York, we'll be using all hydro. So not only we use 1/3 the energy, but the energy we do use will be all clean, and that's a big deal for us. And then lastly, it's policy. I mean, policy is important, and to have strong support as you nurture a company from that crucial sort of innovation stage to where you have sufficient scale to compete globally. That policy is critical, and the leadership of Governor Cuomo has been instrumental in getting us there.
Thanks, Frank. Peter, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I could echo a couple of these things, but with some additional examples. So, we do work, as Chad said, with the Northeast Clean Energy Council, with hundreds of companies, clean energy companies from very early stage, what Frank was with 1366 back a number of years ago, and as well as all the way through the emerging companies, the growth companies, and increasingly global corporates. And I think there's several things that I see happening that are really strong here in the Northeast and have an impact on both manufacturing, but on clean energy innovation as well. One piece is the way manufacturing is changing, and we see the kind of partnering going on around manufacturing. So some of the folks who are here work with startups, with growth companies. They're the resources, and building that resource network, I see it at the incubators we work with. You see it with the 3D printing technologies in the universities. You see it with the modeling tools that exist now in software to be able to iterate much more in product development and in design of new products before you go to manufacturing. All of that there's rich expertise there. You also see it in an innovation ecosystem. I mean, the Northeast has had innovation at the core of its economy for many decades with different technologies in different markets. We see it now with energy. And we see the universities, we see the startups. We run the Clean Tech Open Northeast business plan competition, and we haven't announced this yet, but we just closed the applications. We had over 100 startups from the Northeast apply this year. That's about 40% from New York, 40% from Massachusetts, the rest from around the Northeast. And that's because they know that they can get connected into the ecosystem, the mentors, the customers, the investors, the test sites, the ways to test their ideas early on, as well as to maybe find development partners on the manufacturing side. I think the third point, and Frank mentioned it on the policy side, it's about markets. Policy in the Northeast, I think we have states and actually cooperation across the states to try to create policy structures, policy clarity that can be market pull for new technologies, whether it's distributed energy resources, modernization of the grid, large-scale resources, how these different technologies can be integrated. But we also see markets is also about the companies who work in these markets. So the other thing that we see, and it was mentioned earlier about GE moving their headquarters to Boston. We have companies like GE and Veolia and Schneider Electric, Enel, who's here, major global corporates who have their North American footprint here in the Northeast, partly because they're engaged in the markets here. That creates pull, it creates partnership opportunity with the emerging technologies. All those things are strong.
Thanks, Peter. So on that emerging technology point of view, Leonard, do you want to?
Yes, Composite Prototyping Center is a unique facility. You probably know of one other one.
Oh.
How about that? Is that better? All right, I guess it's working now. All right. And generally I'm too loud, so this is good. All right, so the CPC is different from Fraunhofer, which is the other institute, in that there's no operating money available. We have a state grant from the New York State for over $15 million of capital equipment. Our mission is twofold. One is to provide access to small, medium-sized companies and also large companies with using advanced materials, advanced composites. It's the age of materials. Everything that we touch and work with in manufacturing is going to be changed in the near future, in this next generation. And the other mission, which is the reason why I came out of retirement, is STEM, and it's workforce development. We're working with the returning veterans, and we're also working with high school kids. And I think it was beautiful when you had mentioned about manufacturing being ugly and dirty, and their parents think that. And when they come to our center, it's all about computers. And they get to work with a 5-axis CNC machine, a 5 replacement machine that was developed in New York State. As a result of that, we've changed some attitudes. And hopefully some of them won't become doctors and lawyers, become engineers. And that's part of the mission of our center. But we've also been really fortunate at the DOE and through Craig Blue and IACME, we're the Northeast branch now, and satellite of the AEMC Center, which is headquartered at Oak Ridge and at Nashville. So as a result of that, we front the Northeast to be able to do advanced technologies and advanced composites, and hopefully the companies, and part of the key of this meeting and other meetings I go to is get that message out to the Northeast, in particular New York State and New England, that in fact we have an opportunity to do a lot of things in the advanced materials area. It's an exciting time for that.
Well, I want to perhaps follow up that point and tie that into something, Peter, that you just mentioned around connecting the ecosystem and making sure that many firms, not just large ones, but small and medium-sized firms, know about the ecosystem, know about shared infrastructure. Could you talk a little bit from your own perspective, your experience in how small and medium-sized firms and the great supply chains in the Northeast are connecting to the ecosystem? What are some of the opportunities, some of the challenges? What can we do as a group to optimize this ecosystem?
There's a lot going on, and yet I know there's a lot more that can be done. I mean, the Northeast, most of the states in the Northeast are relatively small. So while state government may look at what they can fund inside the borders, they know that most of the companies are working in regional markets. And so I think there's all sorts of gatherings. Things like this, we do convenings pretty much every month where we're bringing together both our member companies, but sometimes with different other stakeholder groups. So we bring them together with policymakers, with large companies, with the startups, with the universities, and we do it around certain themes of markets, because I think that's actually the best way to make these connections happen. So that can happen also with manufacturing. We've had a group of a handful of some of our larger companies who really are very much engaged in manufacturing, who've met a number of times looking at, I think, sort of a subset of some of the topics here. How could we build some connections that would leverage what both of your organizations are doing, and connect that to the test sites that exist in universities, the fabrication modeling tools that might be in universities, the private labs, but also how companies had the ability to come in and do joint work, whether it's at the prototype, whether it's at the toll manufacturing stage, as a way of trying to develop something, but then also connecting to a customer as a way to test quickly. The challenge, and Dave mentioned this earlier, that we've had challenges in terms of how the innovation life cycle and the private sector financing of clean energy startups and clean energy innovations has had a number of disruptions. But we don't see the large diversified venture capital firms playing a big role, but we see much more going on with wealthy individuals, family offices, the corporate venture groups who are investing strategically. So I think the whole thing is, how do we bring groups together around strategic shared topics? Because that's the way you can build regional networks that can accelerate innovation.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. The Assistant Secretary mentioned this morning the 12 or so regional dialogues we've had across the country. One of the emerging themes very early on was this point around financing and new models of financing. So I'm interested to hear that from you. But Dolores, I'm also wondering if you could share, as you think about Eastman Kodak and what you're trying to develop there in the business park, how is that going to help people sort of get over some of these valleys of death that they experience, and not only in the design and development, but ultimately the scale up and, to the point that was made earlier, the global competitiveness of, say, a 1366, the export of really clean tech products?
Well, the whole model is that as you get started, the whole capital to get manufacturing up and running is incredibly expensive. And there aren't a lot of venture companies that are funding making that big investment, because it's still a very high risk. And so what we allow people to do is get in and use a day, a month, a year on different products, and it's a combination of technology and people. So we have people within the region that they have access to that can help them as they develop as advisors, and actually to help them do some of the development. And then we have equipment. So in the energy sector, we have a tolling roll-to-roll piece of equipment. New York Best has a test facility that they can come in. So they're saving millions of dollars leveraging that infrastructure and sharing on it. And then the other thing that we do is the New York Best has a conference, or it has a organization that brings people together. So it draws together this nuclear of energy companies, and along with that, then they can start, working together, and you get that network going. So It's how do you create this attraction of a nucleus, and then you really start building on it. Companies start working together, sharing capabilities, and it's really getting some strong success.
Just to reinforce that, the difference between obviously software generation and manufacturing is capital,
Yeah.
and that's the hurdle for all small companies, medium-sized companies. We make things, and when you make things, you have to have equipment that makes them. Those are millions of dollars. So if the state and other agencies can provide that capital and provide that at a reasonable cost and make it available, then they get past that valley of death and can get to the TRL levels of 4 to 7. So in fact, build a product, and once the product has got a customer, then they can go out and buy the equipment. And then it's not a risk to their investment bankers and their venture capitalists. So the big key here is providing that capital to make those things happen for small companies.
Frank, any?
Well, so, I mean, if you step back a little bit and you sort of ask what we're good at as a nation, then, I mean, clearly we are better at innovating than anybody else, right? You can just look at Nobel Prize winners, quality of patents. So we're really strong in innovation. We have absolutely the best universities on the planet. On the other hand, we are strong in capital markets. We have deeper, larger capital markets than anybody else, and certainly that's the case here in New York. And so we can do the innovation, and ultimately we can do the scaling. And if you want to be strong in manufacturing, you've got to have scale. Scale is absolutely essential. Innovation by itself is not enough. You got to have scale because you got to move down that learning curve that exists for any technology. And so the big question then becomes, how do you bridge? How do you bridge from innovation to that large scale? And there you have to do a certain amount of nurturing. And and if you study the successes of other countries, they've been very effective at making that bridge. And we do so well in certain industries, right? We absolutely dominate the world when it comes to healthcare. We dominate the world in defense. And so we have plenty of models that show how we can bridge. But for manufacturing industry, currently we're not really doing that effectively. And so I think solving that problem will allow us to be competitive.
I could jump in on that. I agree, but I also think it's not about how you do a handoff from innovation to scale. It's how you can connect and combine those. Because part of what I think is the opportunity around manufacturing is also about continuous innovation. And being able to have the organization, be able to have the tools and expertise to continually evolve while you're also moving towards scale into economies of scale. Because part of the competitive differentiation for so many products is around that kind of continuous innovation side of things. And it's part about the shorter life cycles and revs of new products that I think incentivize the idea of keeping some manufacturing closer to your R&D and closer to the expertise to that, as well as closer to early adoption customers. And that's one of the things I think we have quite a bit of. We have opportunities for that in the Northeast to make those connections work.
Yeah, because I think that's one thing that many people don't appreciate is that manufacturing is in itself a experience and capability that you typically don't learn in college. You have to get it with the stripes of it, and if you can share that experience and leverage from that, because that's what we find. We have companies that come in that have great knowledge, but you can't possibly manufacture what they have. And so leveraging knowledge that's been built over multiple years, which we have lost a lot of, it's really important that you work together to share that.
That's part of a center, and absolutely agree that, that tribal knowledge, particularly in something like an exotic material, at least initially in advanced composites, was actually the first composite part was built on Long Island, a 14 horizontal stabilizer. And we still have people that I have access to help design and build that. Yeah. So as a result of that, that transfer of that knowledge to that next generation and that whole generation of engineers like myself are retiring. And if that transfer doesn't happen, then we've lost it. And we've lost it to the rest of the world. And importantly, that's why we're saying, as a result of the work that AEMC is doing in vehicle, we're being threatened. When you have BMW building an i3 and i8, that's in composite. And that's the challenge that Acme's taken on, and that's a challenge that we have to do in almost all of the industries we're addressing and across the board, and I think that's only going to happen with centers like the ones we're talking about and the support of organizations like this.
Well, perhaps just to tease that out a little bit more, we've talked a little bit about some of the distinctive characteristics of this region: deep capital markets, incredible talent base, history of manufacturing. So I think there are a lot of things that other regions can learn from this area. But Leonard, you also mentioned your deep connection with AEMC and a national network of innovation. So I'm wondering, what lessons are you all taking from other parts of the country and bringing to the Northeast? Are there things you're seeing that are being done elsewhere that should be done here, can be done here?
Absolutely.
So we'd love to hear that.
Absolutely, and that's part of that interaction, cooperation that's critical. The Anonymize are given that opportunity, and we're just talking about advanced composites, but obviously the new Photonics Institute that's being done at DOD at Rochester is a great example of that. And what was mentioned across the board, I think that's an incredible opportunity in Anonymize to make that transition. They're located in one location, but in fact their goal is to be national. And to be that national, you could create satellites, like I said, Greg has done with us, and I'm sure there'll be satellites in the West Coast and also the Southeast. That's the key, because that transfer of technology from those centers, particularly out of Detroit, and also what we're doing, is going to be the key to being able to implement those things that we're talking about with new startups. They're going to have that access to the information, both technical and capital-wise.
Yeah, I think the Anonymize will be very powerful, because there you are partnering across the country, both in the colleges and also the private. What will be really important with those is how we transition from what we're either doing for the Department of Energy or the Department of Defense, and to take that into the private sector. That's the piece that we really have to make sure works, because that's when you get large-scale manufacturing back here.
And the training part of it. The training is a critical element. Without that, you can't make that transition you're talking about.
So just to interrupt we've talked about, you mentioned training, we've talked about 300,000 great students in the region. Frank, you mentioned, we heard from the Chancellor this morning, 500,000 great students just in this system alone. So it sounds like you can find all the talent you need in this region, but I wonder, is that true? What are some of the talent opportunities you see going forward? And from the private sector point of view, what would you like to see more of? How can our universities, our community colleges, and even our national labs help, in some sense, turbocharge the workforce to also deal with some of the demographic challenges that you mentioned, Leonard?
Well, I think that's got to happen through the evolution of cooperative activities. I give a shout out to the schools locally here. We've reached out to CUNY a number of times, and we're trying to work with them. Stony Brook has done an incredible job tied in with Brookhaven National Labs, and then on top of that, they have a advanced energy technology research laboratory that's driving their energy activities, and I think that's being reproduced across the country. And I think the seeds for that are the Anonymize and making those things happen. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple of other areas I can touch on. We've also been, NREL runs a national network of incubators. We've been a member of that, and we don't run a physical incubator, we run a virtual accelerator network that connects all the 15 incubators across the 7 Northeast states. So we work at how we can share resources across that kind of a network. And that's one of the opportunities, I think, at the national level, is how do we connect resource networks to help innovate around specific technology, specific companies. There was a mention earlier about the small business voucher program that DOE has for vouchers for doing testing and development at labs. We're a collaborator in that. We're a channel in helping to spread that opportunity to some of our members. I'd love to see that kind of opportunity connected into being able to have those vouchers work with regional development resources, both private and universities as well.
Yeah, greater leverage.
I think that's a big opportunity there, and it could be around certain themes where there's certain kinds of expertise.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because as you look at where the gaps today, I think we do have a great talent pool when it comes to innovation. We're missing the manufacturing capability. And so as we look at where gaps are in funding, it's really helping people move to the manufacturing, because if you look at students and how they choose where to go, They look at where's the opportunity and where's the money, and that's what they've, well, they have a passion, but they have to have a job too. So I think getting more funding into driving manufacturing in not just in the government sector, but how do you support the private sector has to happen.
So Frank, on that point, CEO, merging company, scaling, what are your talent opportunities and challenges? Are you finding all the workforce you need here? And how are you perhaps collaborating to make that happen?
So, talent is one of our big advantages, right, in this country. China has scale, they have 1 billion people, and so they have a lot of smart engineers. But the US draws from a talent pool of 6 billion people. We are the shining city on the hill, and everybody who is very talented wants to move to the US. And that's one of our big competitive advantages. We should be cognizant of that, and we should make sure that we continue to preserve that. Perhaps not build too many walls. In our case, I attracted a chief operating officer who was running 4 factories in high quality medical glass. Glass, of course, melts at roughly the same temperature as silicon. He had 1,000 people reporting to him. The most difficult factory in Mexico, he had gone down there and fixed himself. Fantastic manufacturing guy, very capable and a huge help. On my board, I have the guy who invented copy exact at Intel, and brings a lot of manufacturing expertise. He was also the president of First Solar for a while. So I'm not short of talent. This region is not short of talent, and our country is not short of talent. We have plenty of talent.
Leonard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think part of it is you have to sell manufacturing to that talent. I mean, and clearly one of the challenges in what I've seen, when we bring in students into the center, we run an introductory program, and initially they get a credit from Vaughn College, which is a local school, and I think part of that's why their parents have them come there. And then they get interested because I have a Lamborghini on the floor. I mean, so all of a sudden we're building some composite parts from a Lamborghini, and I can show them all kinds of parts from F-14s and aircraft, space. They want to talk about the cars. And getting them excited, getting them interested is a key element. And once that happens, they start thinking about it. And then you got to capture them if they're going to be engineers, making those decisions early on in their career. And that's the key element. I think, and that's the challenge you have. I think they're there. It's just a matter of making sure that they're interested in getting into this field.
You make an interesting point about sort of the interest level. The council has been lucky to partner with our colleagues at Lockheed Martin over the past couple of years on an effort to elevate engineering to the forefront of society, with perhaps a goal towards driving a greater talent base in this manufacturing space. One of the other things we're also, I think, have learned from the experience as well as from the AEMC partnership is to the point around what's exciting. This, not only just a maker movement or a do-it-yourself movement, but how do you really, in some sense, communicate about what is manufacturing? So I'm wondering if you all could share from your perspectives, to your Lamborghini example, what is cool on the floor where you're working? Where do your companies who are involved in your council, what are you hearing that you find inspirational and you think could in some sense attract this next generation of manufacturers who will in some sense underpin all of our standard of living for the next 3 decades?
Yeah, I think some of the areas where I see what's attracting some of the young entrepreneurs, especially where it ties into manufacturing and physical product development, is what I see going on both in some of the universities and in some of the incubators we work with. Greentown Labs in specific in Somerville, Massachusetts is the largest clean energy incubator in the country, maybe in the world at this point. And they do specialize in hardware-related innovations. So you'll see they have laboratory, they have prototyping equipment, and you've got over 40 companies who are being incubated there right now, all at different development stages. But part of what's so exciting is if you're working there, you're interacting with all 40 companies. You're learning about the challenges, the opportunities, the approaches they're taking. And at this point, there's also a bunch of large corporates, some of the ones I mentioned before, GE and Shell and others who actually have people who come on site there on a pretty regular basis, interacting and advising these companies. That's how they connect into the broader ecosystem and understand sort of the path to market challenges and opportunities that give people a sense of how you might think about roadmaps for products, roadmaps for companies, but also career roadmaps for working with these large organizations. If that's all happening in the ecosystem, I think we're breaking down barriers.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on, Leonard, in addition to the Lamborghini, what else are you seeing in the world of composites that's, exciting for you? And if you were, beginning your career today, where would you see yourself spending your next 20 or 30 years?
Well, I think it's taken 40 years to get to the 787, which is the Boeing plane that's all composite. Aerospace took that long. I mean, I think it'll be a disaster if it takes that long to do that for Detroit. And then certainly it'll be a disaster for that if it happens in wind and storage containers. That's basically the mission that IACME has. And then you can cross almost every path of every industry and identify those, as I say, as an age of materials. We've got to make those transitions happen faster. That valley of death is a silly term, but the fact is it's a real life. We do all the research necessary. We get to TRL4 and we never implement. And we don't implement because the small companies, medium-sized companies, don't have the capital to be able to make that transition. Making that happen through Anonymize is a big part of what their mission will be, and hopefully it'll make that happen for this next generation of students.
So I think there's a gap there. I wouldn't tell you that what I see is there's a lot of young students that are saying that's where they want to go. Honestly. So I think that work has to be done. I think there's pockets of it. We have to build on it. But they don't see enough of the opportunity yet there to really be running towards that.
Okay. Well, to that point, what can this region do to highlight that opportunity? Are there things that we can be, not to put anyone on the spot, but I think it would be important for us to think through as we leave today, some recommendations as to what we can do as a group together. So we'll have some time at lunch to talk about that, but if there are things on your mind now, it would be great to hear. I'd also like to, as in our few remaining minutes, link to this, to ask each of you to think about a policy concept that you think, if scaled, if deployed more regionally, that could be beneficial. You've seen work here, Peter, you mentioned this sort of better leveraging of the SPVs that I thought was an interesting idea. Are there other sort of burning issues on your minds that you think if we were to act now would have an outsized benefit for national manufacturing, but really driven from the regional perspective?
One of the things that we're working on right now is we've started a college campus. Our local community college is now locating at the park, and they're running programs there. They're going to start next week. And the value of those are that they're going through in a collaborative model where they're working together. But the key piece of it is that they have an intern program as part of that, and they have agreements with the companies that are at the park that they'll have intern positions that will hopefully translate into jobs. And that is a real value for people because now they're entering a program that they're pretty comfortable that they're going to end out of a job. We think that will help get traction, attracting people.
Success will drive interest, right? So if you just have enough success stories, then there will be plenty of interest. People want to make things. It's in our nature. Yeah. Human beings want to make things. And if there's one thing that we can do to become more successful, that is cut the amount of red tape. Move faster. Certainly in government, try to cut the amount of red tape. Make decisions faster. Doesn't even matter so much what you decide, just make it quicker. And so that will be a tremendous help, because the cost of long review periods and delay is much higher than people realize.
Leonard, Peter?
I think I would add, and this came up briefly before, and I think, Chad, you mentioned in terms of the financial sector's strength in this region. But we haven't really talked about that much, but we are now talking about how does stuff scale, and finance is certainly part of that. I've been in a number of conversations with some of the large financial institutions in New York and across the region who are, especially after COP21, who are thinking about the scale of the growth markets around clean energy and manufacturing, But the question is, so what are they set up to invest in, and what aren't they set up to invest in? They're set up to invest in deployment of low-risk technologies. They're not necessarily set up to invest in the prototyping or the prototype manufacturing. But that's an area where somehow between the large financial institutions and maybe and private industry, and the third element being the state green banks that are out there. New York has a green bank, Connecticut has a green bank, Rhode Island has a new infrastructure bank, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center does financing. These are institutions that there should be a model to sort of co-invest in addressing this early stage of ideas, moving into prototype manufacturing and to first markets, and to sort of model how those industries and the applications for those new technologies can be accelerated, because then you're accelerating the opportunity to get to the big markets.
I agree completely. I think another element that could happen, getting back to convincing the next generation to get involved, is a national intern program that could be tied together to all the Anonymize that allow students to compete, the best and greatest, and they would love to have hands-on experience. And most of these are the top students. I just don't, there aren't enough opportunities to do that. And in most cases, you have interns that they're not paid, and it's just not, it's a travesty. That doesn't work. I mean, you have to make it, incentivize it, make it a national kind of program, and make it something that people want. And all of a sudden, the visibility becomes extreme and a giant advantage for almost all in the industries. Every one of the Anonymize could benefit from something like that.
Well, that's an interesting point, and perhaps we can end there. I think, as the Assistant Secretary mentioned this morning, $1 billion in commitments really just in the past 4 to 6 years. It's a tremendous, I think, contribution nationally and with regional base. And I think we're now at the point where ideas like this can, in some sense, amplify those investments and in some sense give them additional life. So I want to thank each of the panelists for participating and being with us today, and we'll capture these notes and we'll be back to every one of you with the key findings. So thank you very much.
Thank you.